We have Alexandra Nicoletti and Dan Cedar from Camber Creek and Kairos. The talk will be named Tech Stack ROI, using technology to increase multifamily returns and meet modern renter expectations. So here we are. Welcome.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thanks for being here today. I'm Alexandra Nicoletti. I'm with Camber Creek. As mentioned, we're a prop tech venture capital firm. We invest in real estate technology companies. I'm joined by a colleague and friend, Dan Cedar. He's with Kairos. He also works closely with one of our portfolio companies. Dan, before I got to stop waving the microphone back and forth. Before I turn it over to you for a proper introduction, today we're going to be talking about the tech stack ROI. So we're going to unpack what that means from a multifamily technology perspective. We're going to talk a little bit about what we've seen historically, some of the trends in prop tech from that lens of the tech stack ROI as we're thinking about it, and then how we're seeing that shift specifically with this new economic backdrop that real estate is facing, and frankly technology is facing also, and then talk about some of the trends going forward. So Dan, I'll turn it over to you.
Alexander, thanks for having me, and thank you all for braving the beautiful day outside to sit inside for this session. I'm Dan Cedar. I'm an operating partner at Kairos HQ, which is a New York City-based venture fund and venture studio focused on housing and healthcare. One of the companies we incubated, Built Technologies, I'm the chief operating officer for, and Camber's been an unbelievable partner along the way. So let's dive right in. I think the first question we really wanted to level set with the group is the word ROI. So a lot of real estate folks think about ROI on a daily basis on the investment side. But Alexandra, how do you think about ROI on the technology side?
Yeah, so I think this is a great place to start, and I want to talk about, specifically some of the trends we've seen historically. So over the last decade, we've seen really a period of sustained growth on the real estate side and in more multifamily specifically, right? We've seen consistent rent growth over that decade. Vacancy has remained low. We've seen a lot of capital come into the markets, compressing cap rates, and largely asset values have continued to rise. So there's really been this rising tide over the last decade. Alongside that, we've seen very strong technology adoption on the multifamily side, and that's been great for the industry. We've seen some big names on the tech side come to the forefront and provide real value to owners and operators. But I would argue that there hasn't been a need to really scrutinize this concept of an ROI and really back it up with data, continue to evaluate how the tech is performing and how it's hitting the bottom line, largely because there hasn't been a need, right? Asset values have continued to go up, and so, if it isn't broken, why fix it almost? And so, fast forward to the last 12 months, we've seen all of this uncertainty get introduced into the market. And there's a lot of question as to what the next decade will hold. So maybe I won't tackle the whole decade right now, but even the next 2 to 5 years, are we going to see a period of sustained, potentially lower rent growth? What's going to happen with vacancies? Capital is certainly less readily available, both on the real estate side right now and on the tech side for funding. And so what does this mean from a technology perspective? I think we're going to continue to see real demand for tech adoption, but the conversation is shifting a lot. And so for prop techs, as you're coming up with your new idea, I think what's coming to the forefront is the concept of ROI on technology. We're going to see a real demand for tech that's going to be an asset value differentiator that's going to drive value to the property, to the buildings, and hit the bottom line. And so I think, whereas historically, sure, it's been part of the conversation, I think that's going to be front and center going forward. And so, I encourage prop techs out there too, for anybody in the audience, as you're coming up with your next idea or thinking about a new product line, in your value prop, in your delivery, have that be front and center and part of the conversation. But Dan, I'd be curious, what are you seeing? Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think you said it really well. I think one of the actual unique opportunities for prop tech companies right now is, candidly, deal flow is much slower across the various asset classes. And so your ability to, just get people's attention and time, and for a lot of owner groups actually use this time now when maybe the deal activity is a little bit slower, to really invest in operations, new technologies, because these things do require investments, as we'll get to. But this is a really good time. Things have just, we haven't had a slowdown like this on the acquisition side, in the last 10 or 12 years. So we're seeing our companies being able to get a lot more timeshare and meetings. So this is a good time for prop techs to try to engage with partners on that side. The second thing I'd say, as it relates to kind of the panel, is V2 of what I would say is on the prop tech side is really also designing technologies that don't just provide the ROI, or as part of the ROI calculation. It's not just to the owner groups and their teams, but also the actual residents. I think you're coming out of a world where there's a lot of businesses built that were B2B. And so when you're building a business that's B2B, your end client is the owner group, the landlord in the multifamily sense, and not as much on the actual consumer and the renter. And I think you're seeing a shift where a lot of property owners really want to focus on that renter experience. And you need to work with a company that thinks that the client is really twofold. It's both the owner group or the landlord as well as the renter. And it's really hard for kind of the more legacy businesses to adopt. That's just not how a lot of these big platforms are. They are B2B businesses. They view their clients as a landlord. So I think that's a huge opportunity in the prop tech space to really build a renter-first product, and that will have ROI for the owner groups.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think that's a great point, and something we're going to unpack later on, but I think it's important to touch on, because I think Built Rewards, right, is a great example of that, providing a real amenity to renters through a very unique and actually valuable rewards ecosystem. And I think a lot of the time, you mentioned, B2B software companies, right? You think they might be improving operational efficiency for the operator. I think of Funnel Leasing, for example, that does, really end-to-end leasing workflow software for leasing teams. And right, as I think about the ROI there, it is time saved. It's potentially personnel saved if you think about the trend towards centralization. But there is also an impact from the renter's perspective, right? You're delivering, at the end of the day, also a better customer experience through automating certain pieces of the puzzle, like being able to automatically book tours online, or signing a lease online, for example, right? And so, I think that's one where also having that enter the ROI conversation, if you will, is very important.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. So you mentioned, Built on the revenue side, Funnel on the cost, leasing side. I know sustainability is another big one for you all. Are there any other kind of themes or companies you see taking advantage of this?
Yeah, so, and we haven't touched on this yet, but I think, going forward there, from an investment perspective, and also, from a demand perspective, I think where we're seeing innovation really come out of is going to be housed, so to speak, in three buckets. So we're going to see technology that increases revenue very directly. We're going to see technology that reduces operating costs, and technology in the third bucket that drives efficiency. You could argue that the third bucket, driving efficiency, at the end of the day, you're either driving revenue or improving operating expenses, right? But don't want to get into semantics. I think, that's, each of those buckets has a real ROI attached to it. And I think that's where, at least that's where we're excited to invest. And that's, I think that at the end of the day will also have an impact to asset values.
Awesome. So a study that McKinsey put out said 75% of digital transformation initiatives fail. Based on the companies that you work with and the owner groups that you talk to, why do you think that is happening? My quick answer is that McKinsey advised on 100% of those. But all joking aside, how can prop techs and their owner groups work more closely together to have a positive outcomes for all involved?
Yeah, so it's a pretty stark statistic. And I think you hit the nail on the head, right? It's how it's how can they work together. So I don't think this falls on one side or the other. I think the best outcome is driven when there is that collaborative nature. And so, one of the things that we find works really well is establishing that dialogue up front between owner group or customer and the prop tech, right? And so defining what the goal actually is up front, where is the baseline and where do you want to get to with the technology deployed? And then second, taking that a step further is really how are you measuring the impact of the goal? So going back to that concept of the ROI, how are you going to measure it and how are you collecting the data to back up and support that analysis? I think that's really important, right? Because you can have a goal, but you might not have the data readily available. So you have to develop, and I would suggest doing this in tandem with conversations with the prop tech company, right? Have that be a collaborative dialogue to achieve. You both want to get to the same place, right? You both want that success. And then third is, and I know a lot of folks do this already, is establish really a point person to spearhead the charge, and whether that's both internally with internal stakeholders as well as with the prop tech. So, we always hate to see, a 3-month pilot, and then at the end of that pilot, everybody pulls up and says, well, we didn't see anything because we just weren't engaged. But what should have happened is ideally along the way, after the first couple of weeks, we're not seeing what we thought we were going to see. How can we go back to the prop tech and maybe adjust or tweak and fix what's going on? Maybe it's a training issue, maybe it's something else. Yeah. But have that be a collaborative process is what we find to work really well.
Yeah, I think this is really the key point for prop techs and owner groups. Like, this is where I've seen at least the most amount of things fall apart, and it can fall apart for a lot of reasons. Everybody has a lot going on. So on the prop tech side, you have to be really thoughtful, I think, and lay out clearly how is what you're doing going to impact the various teams across the organization. It's not just the first person that you pitch who might be interested in the product or the opportunity. It's how is it going to impact, on the build side, because we do payments and rewards, how is it going to impact accounting? How is it going to impact IT integrations? How is it going to impact marketing? And if you as the prop tech can come prepared, a lot of times, these are the same questions a lot of owner groups will ask you, and you can kind of say, hey, here are the pain points we saw there. This is how we solve it. Give the owner groups as much information as possible. Do not lead with the, oh, this takes no time to set up, it's one thing and move on, because that has almost always failed. So a really thoughtful approach on the prop tech side, I think, goes a long way. At the same point on the owner group, having a champion, making sure your various teams are involved and engage, and it's not something that one person on the organization flipped it on, and all of a sudden it goes live with a pilot, and everybody's saying, wait, what is this? The on-site teams weren't aware of this, etc. Because then what happens is, it never can advance past the pilot. So making sure there's a real champion driving the different parts of the project forward at the ownership level or the property manager level is critical.
Yeah, and I want to touch on, something you mentioned, which is communication with on-site teams, right? Because a lot of times a decision will be made, not on-site, and then it's how do you deploy it with the on-site teams, getting them on board? And as we think about some of the themes that we talked about before, operational efficiency being one of them, that what plays into that is centralization, which has been a buzzword really for the last 12, 24 months. But I think a common misconception there with centralization is especially with on-site teams, is, oh no, tech is coming in and going to replace my role or replace my job. And I think there's an important distinction to be had where I think the best centralization technology out there, sure, there is an application for you to reduce staff if that's what you choose, but there is just the application of, let's make my existing team more efficient, free up their time to do higher value things. And I think having that conversation be front and center when you're talking about centralization. And I think, Happy Co was here earlier today talking about their Happy Force product, which is virtual maintenance. And I think that's a great example of that, where right? You have a leaky faucet, and what you typically do is, as the resident, you pick up the phone, you'd call, your property manager, your on-site team. They'd send somebody to the unit. they might not have the part to fix it. They have to resend somebody out to the unit. It takes a process. It's not a great customer experience. Now you can literally, as the resident, pick up your phone, FaceTime, video chat with a technician. They can walk you through the problem. If they need to replace a part, they can do it in one trip because they've identified what needs to be replaced. So I think that is, it plays to that concept of centralization, but it's also just making your on-site
100%.
teams more efficient.
100%. So switching gears a little bit in the last couple of minutes. So we think about the go-forward basis. Maybe we start with today. The startup kind of funding landscape has changed significantly the last 12 and 18 months. Where do you kind of see the world today, and how has that impacted, prop tech companies?
Yeah, so I'm glad we're touching on this because certainly the world's changed both from the real estate side and from the tech and VC side. So, largely over the last decade in prop tech funding, we've seen a huge acceleration in growth in terms of funding of private real estate tech companies. However, in 2022, we saw a decline of something upwards of 35%. Year over year in funding. Less large rounds are getting done. There is certainly less willingness to fund cash inefficiency. And so, something that we as investors and you all do as well is, there has to be a clear path to profitable unit economics at a minimum. The concept has to stand on two legs. And going back to that idea of the ROI, the value prop that they're delivering has to be realized by customers. So customers have to see that ROI to remain sticky and to remain a customer. And I think that goes back to some of the themes that we're seeing innovation come out of today and going forward, which is it's delivering a real ROI to the customer, and it's falling in these very concrete and quantifiable buckets.
Yeah. I think what we're seeing on our side and what we're focusing more on is the opportunity to try to back platforms versus point solutions. I think you've seen a number of point solutions. I think the industry candidly wants probably less individual point solutions and more platforms they can leverage, and whether that's through the CRM that Funnel has built out, or what Built is doing on the payments and reward side, the opportunity to consolidate vendors and not have just a single person for rent reporting, for example, when there's 8 people doing it, makes the entire experience a lot better. So as we're looking at new investment opportunities, it's really focusing on what are the businesses that have the opportunities to be platformed and really be transformational for both the renter as well as the owner group. Yeah. So real quick, over the next kind of 1 to 3 year horizon, where you guys see the most innovation coming?
Great question. So, I think sustainability is certainly a theme that has been ever present, right? I think we're going to continue to see a large push in that. And we didn't talk about this, but how does that play into the ROI? We could spend a ton of time talking about it, but, we've seen a lot of really, I would say, cost savings on the sustainability side, right? So there is a quantifiable ROI attached to it. But I think what you're going to start to see more of going forward is have that play into the renter amenity side almost, right? So either offering clean energy to residents like Arcadia is doing, or EV charging. We're seeing a lot of resident demand for that. And then going along that theme, I think what Built Rewards is doing is a great example of really providing a renter amenity that is in high demand, and then owners are starting to do some interesting things with it, like incentivizing renter behavior now that they have this valuable rewards currency. And it can be something as simple as, hey, my pain point is package management. If I give my renters X amount of Built points to pick up their package on time, both sides are happy, right? Now your package management is more efficient, and your renter is happy because they've gotten something for something they were going to do anyways. So we could spend a whole lot of time talking about this, but we should probably wrap up soon.
Yeah, we'll hire McKinsey to give a full detailed report on the innovation ideas.
But thank you all for being here with us today, and
thank you very much.
Yeah.